about 20 minutes. I'll ask that you kindly state your name and your affiliation when you ask a question. And my colleague Rebecca has a microphone, so please speak in the microphone because we're webcasting and we want to make sure everyone can hear you. And so if you could just raise your hand and she'll bring you the microphone. We'll do one question each and a quick follow-up, and if there's time, we can do a second round. The governor is also happy to answer questions in both official languages, if there are any francophones in the room. Avant de poser une question, prière de vous identifier. Je vous demanderai également d'utiliser le micro sans fil. Libre à vous de poser des questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. So let's go to the first question, which I believe is Reuters.
Alistair Charlotte with Reuters. Governor Poloz, given the better Q4 data and the early Q1 numbers that have come out, is a rate cut still on the table going into the April meeting?
Well, we're just in the midst of our next projection exercise, which we'll be coming forward with on April 12th. It's not too long away, so I wouldn't want to prejudge that process. A lot of moving parts in a forecast like that, and of course there continue to be a number of risks that we've identified in the last MPR, important potential downside risks that we need to keep on the table until they're clearer. So I'm certainly not going to prejudge it today.
And a quick follow-up, are you still confident that the federal government stimulus that's been announced will show up in the economic data this year?
Yes, we've been watching it carefully. We know, of course, that the child benefit changes, the Canadian Child Benefit Package, began to impact the consumption data quite clearly in the last 2 quarters of the year, and expect that to continue for a while yet. And the infrastructure dollars are beginning to flow. That's always, it's not like flicking a switch. They have to do their planning and so on, so it takes a little bit of time. But the money's been allocated, so it's a question of at what speed does it work its way through the system. And so we know it's coming. We just have to continue to watch it unfold.
Next question. Over here, Craig.
Governor, you've spoken out quite a bit in the past couple of years about worries about the housing sector and financial stability. Home Capital has fired their CEO, Martin Reed. Just wanted to know if you're satisfied with the risk management and the leadership at Home Capital.
I have no comment on a specific firm, Greg.
Okay, I didn't expect that you would. So on the same vein that you've been worried about the housing market for a while, Ontario, at least politically, seems to be seeing the light. Charles Sousa, the finance minister, says there will be things in his budget to address it. Is it a little late in the game for them to try to get things under control in the GTA?
Well, that's a pretty complex analysis, as we've tried to give as much dimensionality to it as we can in the latest FSR. A very complex question. But at the bottom of it, the GTA economy, if I can use that term, is growing quite rapidly. Job creation is running far ahead of the rate of growth the rest of the country. And so you have increased demand for housing at a time when supply can only keep pace so much. So you have fundamentals that are pushing prices higher. I would just remind you that the moves that the government has put in place have not been about housing prices per se, but instead have been about indebtedness. The idea being that over time the quality of Canadian indebtedness improves, so that people's ability to service their debt is stronger under the new criteria that we have. That has nothing to do with whether or not the price of a house will go up or down. We have commented that even though the fundamentals are strong, it's hard to reconcile the rates of growth that we've seen with identifiable fundamentals, which does suggest there is a degree of expectational dynamics involved. But it's very hard for economists to sort out all those things and to label them all. And so we watch it with considerable interest, and of course it's one of our high risks in the financial system review.
What about you just slide in? Charles Sousa seems to be concerned about speculative behavior, about flippers. Do you share that concern?
So when I mention extrapolative expectation or expectational dynamics, so what we were talking about is the speculative dimension. So if people are buying homes purely on the expectation that their prices are going to rise further, then that's not fundamental demand, which I was talking about earlier, and it's a sort of a riskier type of transaction in a market that can go down as well as up in any situation. So our greater concern is with, as I said, the stock of indebtedness and how people are able to service that debt, both at today's interest rates and now of course they need to qualify at a higher rate of interest in order to assure that they have a sustainable situation, and that reduces the financial stability risks in the economy, which are important to us because any shock in the economy can then be magnified in its effect on the economy through interaction with the financial system. So that's the Bank of Canada's angle on this question.
Hi, Governor. Dave Parkinson with the Globe and Mail. Obviously, this speech had a tone to it that related to what's going on south of the border. Your last NPR actually attempted to make a rough calculation of what some of the fiscal impact might be of the Trump administration. Obviously, it was very preliminary. We've had a couple more months under our belt now, and there's been very little progress and maybe more uncertainty on that front. I guess, would you characterize that the uncertainty on the U.S. fiscal side has become more uncertain rather than less over that period? And if so, what's your approach going to be in terms of trying to calculate what the impact might be on the U.S. economy?
Right. Well, there's no question that, it's hard to measure degrees of uncertainty, Dave, but it certainly is uncertain today, and it was uncertain 2 months ago. And so we'll be doing our best with our assumptions that we embed in the U.S. projection based on what we do know. And what's more important, I think, is that we're going to have to be cognizant of that uncertainty and do some analysis around the assumptions. That is, what if it's bigger, what if it's smaller? So shock analysis to help inform our zone of uncertainty when we're wrestling with the actual policy decision. It's not unlike many other assumptions that are in our forecasts. We're uncertain about potential output. We're uncertain about what the equilibrium rate of unemployment might be. We're uncertain about lots of things. And so generally the tool we would use is to do shocks around those assumptions to make sure we understand how big of an error we would be making if we're wrong about the assumption. And it would be no different for the U.S. fiscal assumption. And right now, yes, it would be an assumption, right? Because it's simply not clear yet what would be the shape of that.
Eric Hertzberg, Bloomberg News. Just curious whether or not you have reason to believe that protectionist sentiment is rising in Canada specifically.
I don't have a measure of protectionist sentiment in Canada or elsewhere, but you do have a sense that if you like, there's more doubt about the benefits of openness around today. There's more articles about it. There's more talk about it. And as I mentioned in the room, I think if you distill it down, at the root of most of those conversations is not really openness, but technology. And it's easy to get the two mixed up. If someone has lost their job, well, they think it might be because of openness, but actually it's technology. McKinsey has done some careful work around this, and I've concluded that a very high percentage of job losses in manufacturing have been due to technology, not because of trade. And the thing that is that historically, whenever there is innovation, technological innovation, although it may displace jobs in specific areas of the economy, it creates new jobs in other areas of the economy and actually creates more jobs than it displaces. That's been historical. And there's no reason to think that wouldn't be the case in this era. And so that doesn't make it easier for people who need to somehow transition to something new. That is something which we need to continue to invest in the tools to make that easier for people.
Any other questions before we go to a second round? Sorry, sorry, there's one at the back. We'll go to you first and then to you.
Thank you, Stephen. My name is Diego Garcia, a UAT student with Riot Radio, student-run radio. With regards to the questions today from the press, could you speak about, if you were to categorize some of the current issues, what's the most pressing challenge do you think it's going on right now for the Banque of Canada, and how do they plan to address it?
Well, for us, the most pressing issue is around the economy's natural tendency to adjust to disturbances. So we were actually well on our way towards what I always call home, or economists call equilibrium, back in 2014. And then the oil price collapse meant a really big hit to Canada's macroeconomy. Something like $60 or $70 billion per year of less income for Canada as a country. And that adjustment has been profound and actually continues. So yes, the hardest part, that is the contraction of the energy sector, appears to be behind us, but the rest of those adjustments will continue for some time. And so that, if you think of that in the big history, that's a setback for us. We were kind of someone leaning against the light switch, or anyway. So we were kind of more or less at the same pace as the U.S., but then we had this setback. And so for us, it's about ensuring that we do what we can to nurture that adjustment, keep our inflation goal in mind. And it's proving to be a very slow process, and not in a straight line either, which can be kind of frustrating because it comes and goes. And so if we talk about serial disappointment, it looks okay and then it disappoints us, or some new shock comes along. So for us as macroeconomists, that's our preoccupation, and we think all the adjustments are in place. We can see them happening. They've happened more slowly than we would have expected, but they are clearly happening. And so we're confident that we're going to get there. But again, all it takes is some new shock to kind of derail it again at a time when the economy is in a fragile situation. And as a central bank, we have very little room to maneuver in that situation. So that's our biggest issue. Till we're back home, we won't be comfortable.
Hi, Rika Sakeli, Oshawa this week. Obviously, you're from this community,
Yes, I am.
and you know well that Oshawa is an economy in transition from being a sort of manufacturing powerhouse. But it seems like there is steady job growth in the community, but a lot of it does seem to be retail precarious employment, and you do have that whole sector of manufacturing that is just simply not getting replaced with the similar quality. Mm-hmm. So what do you see for this community going forward, and how do you sort of get that economic mojo back, I guess?
Well, that's a difficult question at the micro level. If I can answer it from the macro side, we can point to areas of the economy that are growing much more strongly than others, and it's where the job creation is happening. It's primarily in the service business, but and you mentioned retail. I mean, that's of course an important element, but it's not by far the most important in terms of the growth. Growth has been especially strong. Excuse me, I've been talking a lot this morning. The growth has been especially strong in the IT services business, as well as in transportation services, educational services. We're sitting at a well-known college and next door to a university. And there's plenty of foreign students here. Every foreign student that comes in, that's an export of Canadian expertise in the educational services business. And that is a very strong business to be in. And so all these things, in fact, healthcare providers, big growth business because we're all getting a bit older, so caring for the elderly is a growth business. And so these are what I'm mentioning are all high quality jobs. And so even in the construction business, like the stock of housing continues to grow quite rapidly. All those older houses are prime for renovations. The renovation business / construction business is a very strong business and is the sort of thing that's likely to remain so. Now, some of these are options for those who were in manufacturing and can transition to them. Others may not be. But it depends on your willingness to do some retraining, go to a college and get something a little extra to prep you up for something new. And as I said in the room, I think that's the lives of our kids are going to be moving faster than ours did. And so I think when you're going to school today, you need to be thinking about learning how to learn. That is, learning tools as opposed to specific subjects, which may or may not carry you through your entire life. I mean, I got lucky that way, but you know, these days you tend to move around more in different ways. And in order to be ready to do that, be that nimble, you need to have some of that tool understanding as opposed to a specific subject understanding. And the boss sees that and sees an opportunity for you to do something else. Well, that's an opportunity for growth. So anyway, that's a rambling answer, but I think you get the idea. I can't say specifically what's going to happen here, but we're pretty close to, for Toronto here, I mean, it's become a rapidly growing economy. So the spin-offs are, I think, Mother Nature is going to create them.
Okay, we've got 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Reuters.
You continue to sound more dovish on the economic outlook and on the outlook for excess capacity than do many of the private sector economists that you're in conversation with. Why are you so focused on the downside risks?
So that's your question? Why am I so focused on downside risks? Because upside risks would be great, and downside risks would be a problem. And that's my job, to worry much more at this point about. If we were back in home, as I described before, or equilibrium, then we would be equally concerned about upside and downside risks because inflation targeting would be, you know, the anchor to all of that. And so an upside risk would push us above target, and downside risk would push us below target. But since we've been below target for the last number of years, and since we have excess capacity, if the excess capacity doesn't go away, there will be a tendency for inflation to drift below target further. So any downside risk makes that situation worse, and arguably would raise questions like about expectations de-anchoring and that kind of thing. So of course we worry much more about downside risks in this situation. When we present a forecast, we try to present a forecast that's risk balanced. That is, that we've identified both positive and negatives. And the positives, as I said, when you start below equilibrium, the positive risk would be a nice to have. And a negative one would not be nice to have. That's all.
It does just seem more pessimistic than others looking.
Well, you seem to be confusing a concern about risks with a preoccupation about what is our baseline outlook. And we haven't presented a new one since January, and we'll present a new one in a couple of weeks. So I think that's when we can talk about whether or not, we're more or less pessimistic. But I think it would be odd to forget about all those downside risks just because a couple of data points came in a little bit better than expected. We've had positive data points in the last 3 years too, and they didn't last. So we're being very cautious in that outlook.
Your last question?
Dave Parkinson of the Globe again, Mr. Poloz. Just wondering, while we're talking about downside risk, obviously one of them is a very uncertain reopening of the trade regime under which we operate with our largest trading partner. Can you give us some idea of, characterize how big a risk that reopening NAFTA in a significant way would pose, and what form would that take? Would it be a business confidence kind of issue? Maybe you could just speak to that.
Okay, so we don't have concrete answer for that at this stage, Dave. What we can analyze are things like, you know, say a 10 or a 20% across the board tariff, for example. Those are the sorts of things that one can put into a model and actually analyze them. But indeed, what you find is that the results of those things are very complicated. So just imagine it from a personal point of view, if a tariff went up against us across a border, then the consumers on two sides of the border may react differently to those different prices. Companies on one side of the border or the other may react differently. Simple case, maybe a company can just kind of absorb it, you know, and protect the price that they're serving their customer with. Well, that's, I guess, a possibility in some cases, but most of the time you'd expect behavior to adjust. And the main thing is the uncertainty about what it's going to look like. Will it be slightly bad for your business or really bad for your business? You know, is now the right time to expand when you don't know the answer to that question? And so, as you alluded to, it's the expectational or confidence effect, which right now is concerning, like today. The investment in Canada has been very weak, part of that due to the oil price shock, but it has extended out into the rest of the investment picture. And so in that situation, we're watching for an investment recovery, as you know well, but if it's going to depend from company to company whether they have the confidence to do that expansion when NAFTA may change. So that's all individual behavior, both in consumers and companies, and we can't come close to, you know, predicting those things. But what we can do is we can model it, and we can give our best guess. But at this stage, it's an awful lot of work to do on a hypothetical. So I think we'd like to wait and see how things transpire, and you know, perhaps we can keep in mind a general magnitude of the risks as you suggest, but I don't have anything for you today.
Thank you. That concludes the press conference. Thanks, everyone, for coming.